This is the Wisdom Podcast.
Welcome to the Wisdom Podcast. This week I'm excited to introduce Geshe Hopkins. Geshe Hopkins was translator for His Holiness the Dalai Lama from 1979 to 1989, and he was Professor of Tibetan Studies at University of Virginia. He's also published more than 40 books on Buddhism. In this interview, Geshe talks about how he discovered the power of meditation when he was young. He shares stories about encountering Buddhism and his Tibetan teachers. He talks about what it was like translating for and writing books with the Dalai Lama. And he also gives us a few tips for understanding emptiness. And so here is Geshe.
Well, where it started was at the what's now called the Tibetan Buddhist Learning Center in New Jersey, where I was from 1963 to 68. So it didn't start at the University of Virginia or at the University of Wisconsin before that. It was at the, it was called the Lamas Buddhist Monastery of America.
Is that Geshe Wangyal?
Yes, in New Jersey.
So is that where it all began? Well, what sparked your interest in Buddhist philosophy?
It was my own meditation.
Wow.
I was in college at Harvard, and I was meditating on my own. And that really came from leaving Harvard a few years earlier, after my first year, and going to the woods in Vermont, inspired by Thoreau. And inspired also by Somerset Maugham, Moon and Sixpence, and living in a cabin above Shadow Lake in Concord, Vermont. Most people, when they think of Concord, think of
Madison.
New Hampshire.
Yeah, New Hampshire. So.
But this is way up near the Canadian border.
So did you visit Walden then? Because Walden's not far.
Didn't go to Walden. This is outside of St. Johnsbury, which it happens some ancestor on my mother's side, Adams, settled St. Johnsbury. And so it's an Adams who's at the front of the parade, which I never saw. But this overlooks Shadow Lake out to Mount Lafayette in New Hampshire. Very beautiful, very secluded spot. And I think that really is where my mind settled down. And I found I had a strong power to visualize when I was staying at that cabin. And I stayed there until it got really cold, and then migrated to a place in the country, pretty much a cabin in Rhode Island. But in Vermont, I had read The Moon and Sixpence about Gauguin, and that inspired me to go to the South Pacific, and also Herman Melville's Taipei, Typee, which is about Nukuhiva in the Marquesas, which is right in the equator. And so I ended up taking a freighter out of New York.
Were you a stowaway? Or?
No, I was a passenger, one of eight, one of only eight. And I used to go up on them. It's really part of the meditation. Go up on the top, so to speak, deck. And you cannot, there are no decks really on a freighter. But there was a small area around the smokestack. And if you go up on the windward, I guess it would be, side of the smokestack, you don't get any smoke. and I would lie on the deck and stare at the sky. And that was the start of sky meditation. I'd never read about this.
Wow.
It was just something I did.
Yeah.
And the Pacific Ocean was, in that season, once we got beyond you can't be in the Pacific Ocean without going beyond the Panama Canal. But the journey down the Atlantic Ocean was wild. It was turbulent. And sometimes I would, in the cabin, there was one other person in that cabin, and I would just ride from one side of the cabin to the other in an armchair.
In an armchair, right?
Not a big armchair,
Yeah.
but and it was tile floor.
Wow.
And other people were getting sick, but
Yeah.
I was not.
You were just going with it.
Sliding from one side to the other.
How old were you at this stage?
20.
20, wow.
And anyway, you could stop at various ports, and freighters, it can carry. It seems to be an endless amount of things, and down through the Gulf of Mexico to various stops, even to Freeport, Houston, and then down through the canal. And the Pacific Ocean was truly, it happened to be Pacific, truly quiet and extremely beautiful, the blue color and all. So the blue of the ocean, the blue of the sky, and lying up there so often. And I never got to Nukuhiva because, well, one, I didn't have a visa to be in Tahiti. Somehow they let me on the freighter, and somehow I began this journey.
So
I was moving actually to Nukuhiva.
Oh, you were.
I was actually moving there.
No visa. No. So you made it to Tahiti.
To Tahiti, yes. And it's interesting.
Not much Buddhism in Tahiti.
Not much. The guys, my peers, so to speak, never wanted to talk about their lives.
Yeah.
That was quite interesting, because we would sit out on the road at the outside of the bars, on the outdoor bars during the day, and the wahinis would buy us. They would supply us with beer because they were getting money from their patrons at night, and we didn't have money.
Yeah.
But it was, interestingly enough, you sit down with somebody and you couldn't get out of them. It was very hard to get out of them, even where they came from.
Why do you think that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
To this day, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because you would think something would be going on internally.
Yeah.
Such that they'd, at least if you got somewhat close, they'd want to.
Running away from something.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But isn't that what travel companions do, is share stories?
Yeah, share stories.
Wow.
And anyway, I had very little money, didn't have much. And I did rent a motorbike of some sort and went around the island. And after a while, it seemed to me like forever living in a kaleidoscope, looking, one of those. When I was growing up, you would look in a glass sort of thing and turn it.
All the colors.
Yes, and it was just colors.
Changing.
Colors. It's very beautiful, but.
So that was, what's the analogy here? You felt like?
The atmosphere in Tahiti itself.
Yeah.
Gauguin's love of it, for me, turned into boredom.
Yeah.
And plus,
boredom as in no.
The police showed up.
Oh, okay.
And said, you don't have a visa. You've got to leave. But I was ready to leave.
Yeah.
And instead of buying a ticket back, I had to use the last of my money. I bought a ticket to Hawaii. And the seaplane, that's all there was.
Yeah.
The seaplane was flying to, I think it was flying to Samoa, but it couldn't go there because there was a storm. And a seaplane over the Pacific means you're rather close to the ocean. Went on to Fiji.
Okay, yeah.
And so got to stay in a very expensive hotel for nothing. And ended up, and then blah, blah, blah. And when I eventually got back, wherever I was, I would do sky meditation.
When you got back to the States?
When I got back to the States.
Wow. And at this stage, you never... So you were at Harvard at like 1950s? Or what year are we talking?
58.
58, okay. And so you're there for a year?
There for a year, out for a year and a half.
Out for a year and a half.
And then I really didn't know what to do with myself, so I went back.
And you went back to Harvard?
Yeah.
And finished. So then you had, at that stage, you hadn't read any Tibetan Buddhist literature. There was no Jeffrey Hopkins books to read at that stage, was there? And
so then it was really Evans Wentz.
Evans Wentz.
Yes.
So the what is the
Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Did
Tibetan
you find
Yoga and Secret Doctrines.
The Secret Doctrine, yeah. Was that, so you were reading that?
Yes.
Okay, and what was your experience of reading that material? Which is sort of quite different to what you ended up first writing about.
It was wild.
Wild, yes.
One thing I did I think really I began reading it in my senior year.
Okay.
And prior to that, what I did was I was living alone in my senior year.
Yes.
And I made a rug out of burlap bags.
Wow.
My oldest brother was working on a farm alone. Anyway. And so there were a lot of burlap bags, and I sewed them together.
Yeah.
And made a carpet.
Yes.
Out of the
This was in your dorm? Oh no, your senior year. So
in the dorm.
What house were you? What house?
Leverett House.
Leverett, okay.
Yeah. It was Leverett Towers.
Yep.
So it was 8th floor, I think. And the room was facing the ugly part of Cambridge.
Yes.
So I covered over the bay window with plywood.
Yeah.
And put a country picture on it, much like Vermont.
Yes.
And then I figured out how to cover the windows, but let the windows on the sides, but still let in air. Mm-hmm. And I was able to make the place totally dark.
So it's like
I made a dark retreat without ever having read anything about the dark retreat.
This is your senior year.
Yes.
So in your first year, you're reading Walden, heading off and doing meditation.
Yes.
But never really learnt meditation.
Right.
Then you're on this wild adventure across the Atlantic and Pacific, doing like some sort of sky meditation.
Lying on my back.
Lying on your back. Then you return, and then you start finding these texts, early texts like Tibetan Book of the Dead. But meanwhile, also you're creating a dark retreat for yourself.
And then lying on my bed, and somehow I managed to stay awake, staring into darkness.
Yes.
And that does all sorts of things with your mind.
Yeah.
And you have to go through, I had to go through tremendous pain because I wasn't moving. Wasn't moving, staying awake, staring into darkness. And then it turns into, you see all sorts of light shows and so forth. And so outside on the banks of the Charles, I was staring into sky.
Yeah.
And inside, I was staring into a different type of sky, of black sky. And I needed help.
Yeah. Yes.
Going a little crazy.
Yeah.
But pursuing.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine who he knew that Bob Thurman and Chris George had begun going down to Geshe Wangyal's place in New Jersey.
Yeah.
So this is Tom Griffin. And Tom and I, over Christmas vacation, stopped at his family's place in New York State and then went down to visit Geshe Wangyal in New Jersey.
Is this...
And that's how that...
Is this like 1963, around that time?
This is
it a little after?
1962.
62.
Christmas time, 1962.
Okay. I read something about an experience you had in Oklahoma, down the river. That would be about this time? Or?
That's between the junior and senior years.
Okay.
And I went in the first half of this. I used to work always while I was going to college.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't have to work during that summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent half of the summer in North Hatley in Canada, in the cabin of Tom's family's cabin out on a lake at North Hatley.
Mm-hmm.
And I continued the sky meditation there.
What did meditation mean to you then? So you were like...
Well, I didn't call it meditation.
Yeah.
I was just lying on my back.
Just lying.
Used to climb up what was quite steep up to the top of the hill behind the cabin.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to build up my strength in order to climb that.
Mm-hmm.
And then lie on my back up there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent 6 weeks, I guess, there. And then went out to Oklahoma,
Mm-hmm.
where a good friend of mine, his family had a cabin on the river.
The river, yeah. I know that river, actually.
It's near Siloam Springs, Oklahoma. I mean, Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
In Oklahoma.
Yeah, yeah.
And I used to float down the river on a tube, which some people laughed at me at later because of the snakes in the river, but I never had a problem. And a lot of reflection, which is amounted to impermanence.
Okay.
And becoming much more interior.
Did the river inspire that reflection?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
And watching the water where it was very shallow.
Okay.
And because the river was very substantial.
Yeah.
Everyone talked about the river.
The river, yeah.
And,
as a thing.
yes, the river. And yet, when you went to the river and looked at it,
where's the river?
Where's the river? Yeah.
Yeah.
And to me, then, my mind, my spirit, my life was the same thing. And it reminded me of a meditation. I didn't use the word meditation, but as a child, sitting in the back hall of my home, cross-legged, and reflecting that, if I was my right arm and I was my left arm, then I would have to be separate from myself.
What age were you doing that?
Small.
Reminiscent of Shanti Deva's meditation.
Right.
Wow.
And so I decided then that I had to be some spark of light at my heart. You see,
Really?
I made some decision that way.
So how did you get from if I'm my left arm and my right arm, must be two.
Must be separate from
Must be
myself.
separate from the
So
body.
then I had to make myself small enough, you see.
Okay.
So you see, some people do come to that decision when they're taught their Buddhist meditative reflection.
Yeah.
And so that's what came to me
Came to you, yeah.
when I was doing reflecting this way, which is very helpful because it made it very interior.
You say came back to you.
Well, I'd say came back because it was the conclusion that I came to as a child, and and also there was an old fellow that I used to talk to occasionally, talk with. And I was passing by one day in my tube very slowly, and he was propped up against a tree, I suppose sleeping, but he may as well have been dead. And I realized that with death, there would just be the last look, and he'd be gone.
Yeah, not so glorious.
Yeah, and there's no
Triumphant
thrilling
finale.
Yeah, he's just gone.
Yeah.
And like the water.
Oh, there's a link there.
Link with the water.
You were on the river at this stage?
Yes, on the river.
So you were in the river.
Yeah, in the river.
You're seeing he was on the bank?
Yes, he was on the bank.
And he's gone?
Yes, and
just
he's
like the
gone.
river you couldn't find.
Just.
Yeah.
And you've got no baggage. There was no baggage. There's no baggage.
As in, he took nothing with him.
Yes, like you could then look in your. Well, this probably comes from when I got to Hawaii, I went to a hotel where a childhood friend was the manager.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured I'd get a job there.
Mm-hmm.
I had, I think, $18 when I got out of the airplane from Samoa to Honolulu. It cost me I took a taxi. $15 to go to the hotel. So I had $3 left. So I go to the hotel. He's no longer there.
Oh, no.
He's managing a hotel at some other island.
Is your $3 not going to get you there?
So I went. So I had a letter from a Mormon missionary.
Mm-hmm.
The airline had put me up with not a Mormon, but a guy who knew a Mormon in Samoa. He was a football player at something like UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
He was Samoan.
Yeah.
And so somehow that
He's a
connected.
rugby player or something like that, was he?
No, football, American
football. Wow.
Strange.
From Samoa, yeah.
And so we had hooked up with these Mormons, which just blew my mind. Sorry if you're a Mormon. And just I'd never heard of,
Yeah.
And I said, who's your leader? And they said, Joseph Smith.
Yes.
And that just blew my mind that the guy's name was Joe Smith.
Joe Smith.
Because, I was the total virgin to this. And so then I went with them, out to the jungle and where they were proselytizing this. And anyway, so I had a bag, which was one of these old, suitcase hardcover things, plastic but hard. And so I had figured out that his family lived up on the hill. Mm-hmm. And he was the eldest son, and he had written a note to them saying, you have to put up my friend, me.
Oh.
We had become friends. Yeah. And as eldest son, they had to follow his word. Oh. This was my $3 desperation. and I figured I had to walk up the hill.
Wow.
And there was a golf course in the way.
Yeah.
And there was a chain link fence. So I got to the chain link fence, and I thought, now this is a problem. Mm-hmm. So I just threw my bag over because I knew I could take it, because it was so strong. I just threw it away over the chain link fence and thought, now you have to go over the chain
Now you
link
have
fence.
to get your stuff.
So you see baggage.
Yeah.
Baggage.
Yeah.
And it's just gone.
Yeah.
It's just gone. There's no baggage.
Bringing us back to the
So
man.
this guy had no baggage. There's no baggage to take with you. There's no grand moment.
Wow.
There's no symphony playing. You just go on.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
And
so this
it just
hit you.
It's just it's like and it's stayed with me. And when you leave your job, however nice a job it is, you just walk out and the water fills in. It's like pulling your hand out of a bucket.
Yeah.
You're gone.
Yeah.
And it served me well. You leave the university and that's a nice way to leave.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So this was Oklahoma, but we were talking about
Yes,
you were off to
you have
Geshe
to
Wangyal's.
take me back to that.
Yes, it was nice, really nice. And that's between years at Harvard, right? And then at some point you hear about Geshe Wangyal's.
Yes. And Tom and I went, and I actually found it quite silly.
How so?
There were 4 Tibetan monks there.
Yes.
Geshe Sopa, and then Tarze Gunga, Sakya, and then 2 young Gelugpa Druku, Sherpa Druku, and Kamlung Druku.
Kamling Tuku, yeah.
And the whole reincarnation, identifying young boys. And then the conversation that I had with the 4 of them, I asked some questions about dreams, which were very interesting to me. And Geshe Sopa said, they don't mean anything.
Really?
Which I thought was totally ridiculous answer.
What
And
was
I
your
still
interest in
do.
dreams at that point?
What they reveal about what's actually going on in your mind.
Yeah.
And he said they don't mean anything.
Geshe Sopa said this. And this would be Geshe Sopa that would go on to Wisconsin and
Yes.
yeah, and Kunga Rinpoche would go to California.
Yes.
And Shapatung Rinpoche and Kangling Rinpoche would
They
disrobe,
went, They went with Geshe Sopa
Geshe Sopa
to Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And then
And
Geshe Wangyal and I had some discussion, which I don't remember the content of that, but he may have teased me some, I don't know. He did tease me, I don't know if it was in that conversation or the next one. But for some reason I went back, and I went back alone. Tom didn't go with me. And I don't know why I went back. I don't know why. And then he taught me. He taught me the steps for cultivating compassion.
the 7 steps.
And he said, when you're going back and forth to work in Boston on the subway, you can reflect on these. And he taught me them well enough so that I actually did them. And I found them a great challenge and very interesting. And I intended to go back to the woods in Vermont. And I found that very hard to give up. But I couldn't put this down.
This meditation on
Yes,
compassion.
yes.
Can you tell the listeners what you were meditating on? Is this the 7
Yes,
steps?
it's the 7 steps, but it's the preliminary step before the first one, which is that everyone wants happiness and doesn't want suffering.
Okay.
That just as I want happiness and don't want suffering, so you want happiness and don't want suffering. And to go through your acquaintances and to do that reflection patiently, slowly. And I saw what a tremendous challenge that is. And I felt, well, this is my mind. I should be able to do this. And yet it would dredge up all sorts of things. And, it's obvious that, you want happiness and don't want suffering. And yet, I don't want to think this. And yet I'm committed to thinking it. And there were all sorts of obstacles to thinking it. So it became a great challenge.
Yeah. It's obviously true, but very inconvenient.
Yes, very inconvenient. Yes. Yeah. And that inconvenience is really attractive.
Yes.
Something to work with.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't put it down. And
this is very different to people think of meditation as crossing your legs and closing your eyes. You were on your way to work, contemplating, thinking about these things,
Yeah.
and how you are in the world. And so I think that's very
Yeah.
helpful for people to hear, like listening to
Yes.
this conversation.
And it's so stimulating
Mm-hmm.
and so jarring and so disturbing, but so healing and so challenging.
So
And so at some point I began taking apart my future,
yeah.
which was to go back to the woods,
Yes.
but also to go to my home in Rhode Island. And I actually removed every trace of myself.
What do you mean by that?
I've removed all my clothes. I removed all my books. I sold, when I
Why?
left,
Yeah.
there was no trace of myself in
No,
them.
Jeffrey was disappearing. What? Why? Why were you doing
Because I was moving to the monastery
that?
for the rest of my life.
To be with Geshe Wangyal.
Yes,
So
much as I
this place was not so impressive at first, right? But
Yes.
But
Yes.
something about
'Cause
this mental exercise stimulated
Yes, yes, tremendously.
you and drew you back.
And actually, Geshe Sopa, his demeanor impressed me a lot. His humility, I found him very attractive.
Do you remember any particular instances where you walked away with that impression, like something?
Well, actually, his back was to me, and he was washing the dishes in the kitchen.
Yeah,
That image.
this
remained
great
with
scholar
me.
doing the dishes.
Yeah, and I don't know. I knew he was a scholar. I didn't
Yeah.
know how great he
Great,
was at
yeah.
that point.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, I did a lot of work with him in time. Although that was a year or so later that I began working with him. How I came to work with him. I mean, when I went, I was inspired by both of them, because it was Geshe Wangyal who taught me the meditation and who cajoled me. But it was clear when I went there, Geshe Wangyal was a powerful figure, that I was his.
What was powerful about him? His presence, or just his?
His presence, but also he'd fly off the handles,
Yeah.
scold the hell out of him. His finger, he couldn't move his finger, so
he had a
his
hook.
finger,
His hook.
he had a hook. And very excitable.
Yeah.
He'd send you to the store to buy something, and you bring something back, and he'd
the
be
wrong
yelling at you. And a lot of scolding to anybody, Geshe Sopa included.
Yeah.
So Geshe Sopa had to have Sopa, patience.
Yes,
In
exactly.
the face of
He had to live up to
Geshe
his
Wangyal.
namesake. Yeah.
Actually, Geshe Wangyal was the lowest level of Geshe.
Really?
And Geshe Sopa was the
He was
highest
Geshe
of the
Rampa.
highest
The highest of
level,
the highest.
the number one
Number
of the Laramba.
Yeah.
And he had to put up with a whole lot of
Yeah.
shit from Geshe Wangyal.
Geshe Wangyal's Geshe he got in Tibet, but right?
In Tibet, right?
And Geshe Sopa
but he
did-
was Doramba.
Yeah, Doramba,
It was
yeah.
probably Doramba. Probably
Doramba,
meant
yeah,
he just
Doramba.
sat there.
Yeah, got through it. How interesting. And so so the Golokpa Geshes are known as these intellectual powerhouses, right? So were you impressed by that, or that wasn't, someone who would go on to be a professor and write these books, were you impressed by their intellectual thing, or was it these mental exercises you were doing that
Oh, it was
attracted
the
you?
exercise.
Yeah.
It was the psychological exercise.
Psychological exercises?
And no matter how much philosophy I've worked in, and obviously I've worked in some, it's taking it as a psychological material working on your mind. I've really only had one Nyingma That's not true. Yes, one Nyingma Lama. And he said, somehow you're able to take these things in a practical way.
Yes.
And see, he had done training at Drebung also.
Oh, Nyingma Lama at Drebung.
Yeah. This is Kejun Sambo.
Kansas.
And obviously he couldn't himself do that.
Yeah.
And he was, it was like,
Yeah.
how can you...
How do you take this scholarly stuff and actually
Yeah.
apply it to what really matters?
Yeah,
in
and
life?
take it
Yeah.
in such a practical way.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, is hard to convey
Yeah.
in words.
Yeah.
But in any case, how I was reflecting yesterday. I at some point after, well, first Chris George left. Well, I just showed up at the monastery when Geshe Wangyal was in Washington. So I got to move into the monastery right away. Bob and Chris were staying in a house, the equivalent of in the next block.
Yeah.
And when Geshe came back, he let me stay. But he had also indicated that I could come, whereas he was tougher with other people in that sense.
Yeah.
And then he let Bob and Chris move in, and Chris left after some 6 months, and Bob and he went to India together. I stayed, he left me deliberately
Why do you
at the monastery.
Why do you think?
Who knows? But he told me that I could not become a monk.
Okay. Did you want to become a
never
monk?
did. Well, I probably would have done what he said, but fortunately I
Unfortunately, let that one roll.
And Bob was had left after a year and a half. And probably it was after that, I was doing a great deal of meditation. And I don't want to go into detail, but I had some really extraordinary experiences. And actually, and through some really tiny pieces of advice that Geshe Wangyal gave me. But he let me just meditate.
So you stayed there and meditating.
Yeah, well, no, this is not while they were away.
Oh, okay.
It was after they had returned, and Bob eventually had left, and
So I know in the tradition.
and I was in a period of meditating a great deal,
A lot of meditation.
and went through. And the meditation was not directed by Geshe,
Really?
but he gave me a clue one day. Tiny clue, and
What was the clue? I have to
I
ask.
won't tell you.
You can't. Yeah.
It was just a posture.
A posture.
Yeah,
Okay.
and which it suited me,
Yeah.
and I actually from the beginning there I had quite a number of experiences, and I stopped, and he had moved the kitchen down into the basement. And he used to go to Englishtown and pick up, he had an eye, sometimes pick up some really nice stuff and sometimes pick up some real garbage. It was a flea market.
Yeah.
He was able to pick up, in the midst of all this garbage at a flea market, pick up a gem,
Yeah.
pick up a good table. And there was a TV set in the room that I don't think we ever turned on. You know, a console, because we had a TV upstairs. We didn't need some other one. And I stopped. And when I came downstairs, it was maybe mid-morning or maybe 9 o'clock. It wasn't for breakfast. And he turned on the TV with this garbage show on, which is because you see I'd stopped meditating. And he said, now you have to study.
Okay. So he do you think he was in touch
Yeah,
with...
I wonder.
In touch with what was going
I
on?
wonder. And this was the start of my academic career. Wow. And here we are, how many ever decades later?
And that conversation.
And I'm in my ivory tower, which I have built.
Yeah, wow. And you can
my tower of academia.
Academia,
which began that day
with that show on the TV.
Garbage TV on.
Wow. It's amazing to look back on.
And he said you have to study Sidhu's grammar. And that's when I began studying with Geshe Sopa. And it was interesting. He didn't have me continue study with him. He had me study with Geshe Sopa. And we did some work with Sidhu's grammar, which Sidhu's grammar is the #1 grammar of Tibet.
Are you translating that? Or have you
I did a rough translation at that time.
Yeah.
And I think on the website I have published some extracts from it, some very helpful extracts. Yeah. So anyway.
And so I won't ask you about your experiences.
So that's how I came to understand what a great scholar Geshe Sopa is. Yeah. And how I came to learn, you know, when you're around a person long enough, you begin to mimic their mind.
Okay, yeah.
And in time, I asked him, so many questions that by the time I followed him to Wisconsin, I would come to ask him a question, and then I would have the answer myself. Yes. Because I would be thinking like him. And so it taught me how to think. You know, my own mind was making it up. Yeah. So who knows if I was thinking like him or not.
Sounds like a real apprenticeship.
Yeah, it was. And he was truly very accomplished and great thinker.
Yeah.
And then to Wisconsin, I invited another supreme scholar that Geshe La had invited to the monastery.
Geshe Wangyal or?
Geshe Wangyal had invited Kaiser Ngawan Langdon, who was the abbot of the Gyume Tantra College. And then I invited him to Wisconsin, and he really tutored me for about 1.5 years in Wisconsin, out in the country.
And what subjects were you learning?
It was tenets and Madhyamaka.
Madhyamaka, okay, great. So then just to recount, I'm forming a picture. And so you were doing these meditations. We won't go into what the experiences were, but you weren't guided. You weren't like following instructions from the lamas.
I was not.
But there was a few hints and tips, and you felt like, and then at some point, Geshe Wangyal instructed you to start studying with Geshe Sopa.
Yeah.
In terms of text, you started learning Tibetan then, or did you already know Tibetan?
No, learn Tibetan from him from the very beginning.
Wow.
One thing he had me do was to memorize the spoken Tibetan dictionary of Sir Charles Bell. The spelling. He would come in and give me spelling
lessons from that.
Spelling tests.
My God.
And he taught me grammar.
Yeah. And then that opened up the world of Tibetan literature to you.
It did.
Yeah. And then you did your dissertation on, which became Meditations on Emptiness.
Yes.
Right? And so this real interest in emptiness, when did that develop? Was that at this time when you were studying with Geshe Sopa?
Well, Geshe Wangyal taught Bob Thurman, Chris George, and myself sections from Giant Shiba's huge book on tenets. And he always had that book on his table. And so probably the interest came from there.
Yeah. How do you explain emptiness to someone who's new? So we have many listeners like listening to us now, and some would be very familiar with, probably your books on emptiness, and some may have studied Zen or maybe new to Buddhism. So for a person like that who's scratching their head saying emptiness, how do you get that? How do you explain that concept?
Emptiness doesn't mean nothingness. Emptiness means a lack of an over-substantialized status that we see in phenomena. Now, that's a loaded sentence. But even in our raw sensation, we don't see things as they actually are. We see them as more than they are. And that's a huge problem, because even in raw sensation, we see something more than what it is, than what is there. And that draws us into lust and hatred. And so the problem is to see things without that overlay. But the overlay doesn't come from our thinking. The overlay is right there in what we see with our eyes.
In the appearance.
Wow. And it's like, how do you get out of the mess?
Yeah.
So there's a tremendous amount of study to try to figure out what this mistake is and how we're being sucked into wanting what isn't even there.
Yeah. Wanting what isn't even there.
Yeah.
Very nice. So I was thinking, you also spent time with other lamas. Like, were you with, I read something, you were Geshe Wangyal on a dirt floor in India. At what point was that?
That's 1972. And I was up on the hill overlooking Upper Dharamsala. And he was higher up on the hill. And he was helping the meditators. And he had a one-pole cabin with a mud floor.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't mud, it wasn't wet, it was dry.
Dried.
And it was great. He taught me the fifth Dalai Lama's stages of the path, the section on wisdom. And it was lovely.
At this stage, were you also taking teachings from His Holiness Dalai Lama?
Yes.
Yeah.
From His Holiness. And this must have been was probably my second trip to Dharamsala. On the first trip, I was taking teachings from His Holiness and from Kejun Sambo. So I was getting Nyingma teachings in the morning and then teachings from His Holiness in the afternoon. And then when I was above McLeodganj, Upper Dharamsala, His Holiness would call me to the private office when he had time, which was quite often.
Very nice.
It was really a lucky time.
So you were with
when
His
he
Holiness?
had time. He had time.
Just you two together?
Yes.
Discussing?
Oh, yeah.
And so what would you talk about?
Many, many, many times.
Yeah.
Uncountable times.
What an amazing, there's just no way that would happen now.
Specific books.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be
Also,
so
you were
difficult to
translating
happen now.
Ngakrim Chenmo and stuff like that there?
First, it was the key to the middle way.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first one was key, yes, for key to the middle way. Second was probably the short book, Nang Chung Alter. I forget what the English translation is, my own, but identification of Buddhism.
Yeah.
And then he suggested the Great Exposition of Secret Mantra, and I actually laughed.
Why is that?
Because at that time, we could hardly mention the word Tantra.
Tantra. Okay.
Yes, it was like forbidden.
So you hadn't studied mantras
No,
like with
nothing.
Geshe Wangyal or
No, nothing. Oh, you couldn't mention it.
you wouldn't?
You couldn't mention
It's like kick
it. No one.
some.
Yes. And, totally new topic. And I was in above Dharamsala at that point. And so I went back to my place and I thought, well, if he wants me to do it, I probably should do it. So when I went back to see him the next time, I said, well, that's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, you see, I'm very straightforward.
Yeah.
And that makes the mixing
Easy.
very easy.
And direct.
Yeah, very direct. And
So then,
you see, the first time I explained to him that I had memorized the outline of Ngao Belden's Salam Pinamsha, the
explanation, translate.
presentation of the grounds and paths.
Yeah.
And that I had asked the abbot of the Tantric College, of the Gyume Tantric College, to teach it to me.
Was that Lati Rinpoche or who?
No, this was John Bel Shemben.
Okay.
And he just took the letter and stuck it behind him.
Yes.
He happened to be visiting Namgyal.
Yeah.
And Gendon Lotre, with whom I studied in Germany, he was a student, a super student of Nguyen Langdon. Had written a letter because I had spent 6 weeks, 2 months in Germany with him. And he was introducing me as a suitable student. And so anyway, I told His Holiness I had memorized it, and he said, Gyoda, repeat it.
Yeah.
And so it really put me uptight. And I said a very foolish thing. I said, but there are so many people here. And there was only Denzin Geshe, and His Holiness and I weren't using him. And so I closed my eyes. I realized the stupidity of my remark.
Yes.
Closed my eyes and began reciting it. And so I was going,
Yeah.
and I opened my eyes at one point when I felt self-assured to continue. And he was beaming.
Yeah.
So happy.
Wow. Great memories.
So he taught it to me.
Yes? Fantastic.
So he had to give me initiation.
Yeah.
So I was the first person to get initiation, you see? First. And so he had a couple people who had robes,
Yes.
a couple other Westerners who had robes, to come to the small initiation also.
Oh, what an amazing time.
Yeah. And that began the whole, really, the whole thing of,
His Holiness.
how many initiations he's given.
Wow. From that memorization. Amazing. And then...
And he taught it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then so many things came out of that.
Like...
And then, you see, then he asked me to translate the Great Exposition of Secret Mantra,
By some company.
which I laughed at, but then accepted.
Yeah.
And then he sat at the end of this large table, and I sat here, and I had an uher reel-to-reel, and he explained that this, in general, was forbidden to, translate and publish. But it was more important at this time, when people were translating and making mistakes and so forth, to do a proper translation and, to move the line of what was secret and to publish.
Okay.
To publish a proper translation.
So a text that would traditionally be not available became available because out of a need of accuracy.
Yes.
And because, did His Holiness think that people had a lot of misunderstandings about Vajrayana and Tantra? And this was to help with resolving those misunderstandings. And those misunderstandings were in the Western world or in Tibetan? It was
not in Tibetan.
Yeah,
He's not saying Tibetan. It was not done for Tibetans.
Yeah.
And so he taught, over a period of time, taught the introduction, action tantra, performance tantra. He skipped yoga tantra because he wanted himself to study it more. And he taught the stage of generation portion of highest yoga tantra in that sort of setting, either at that table or in his office to the side. And then after he had studied yoga tantra, his office wrote, these are letters at that time, and told me to come to a public lecture. And at the public lecture, he gave, this is where, you see, he had studied the yoga tantra more, and he gave the teaching on the whole thing. But the teaching, that's where I got the material for yoga.
And then, because yoga tantra in the Tibetan tradition is not as well practiced, right?
Well,
is that fair?
It's not as well practiced in Gelugpa.
Okay.
But in Sakya it is.
Okay.
And actually, I didn't check with him, except that I do know this. He went to the Indian texts and obviously did a great deal of reading, and probably consulted with Sakya teachers.
And what about the Chinese tradition? Is yoga tantra more?
Yeah, it's very big.
Yeah, so was His Holiness
Chinese and Japanese.
Chinese and Japanese, sorry. Japanese, yeah. Then what about the Dzogchen completion stage part?
Completion stage, I've only been to public teachings, and it was not in the context
of this.
I mean, supposedly we were to go on.
Yes.
But the curious thing that I found was I was very thirsty to get on to highest yoga tantra, but I found it extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Now, what had happened in the meantime was I was at Shartse College in Ganden, going over with Vladi Rinpoche, which was our habit. It was a translation, I think, of the middle length stages of the path on special insight, translating my English back into Tibetan. Now, of course, if I had recently looked at the Tibetan, that would have made the exercise of translating from the English useless. But I would do it fresh.
What was the purpose of that?
The purpose of it was to check my English translation.
Okay.
He didn't know English.
Yeah.
So if it was fresh, if I hadn't looked at the Tibetan recently, then he could check my English by checking my Tibetan.
How interesting.
So, and that's how we did it.
Yeah.
For a number of, I don't know how many books. And he told me one day, "Oh, His Holiness is probably going to come to Ganden." I don't know if he said Shartse or Ganden, but the same thing. Because once he came to Shartse, it means he's coming to Ganden. To teach the essence of eloquence.
Oh, nice.
And so I thought, I've got to get ready. So there was one of those little, this type of book. Yeah. And I started reading it. I didn't understand anything. I was like reading some other language.
Because Lecture Ningpo's, Essence of Eloquence is supposed to be one of Tsongkhapa's most difficult ones.
Most difficult. Yeah. And so then I thought, well, the way I do things, I've got to translate it if I'm going to understand anything.
Yeah.
And so, again, lying down. Lying down is my favorite
That's
posture.
your thing, yeah.
Put a tape recorder on my chest and start translating. Yeah. And at nighttime, there was some monk who was practicing his memorization of it, who was shouting it outside the small guest house at that time.
Yeah.
I have no idea what it's like now. Must be pretty nice. And so that was sort of auspicious in itself. Oh, what's he shouting? Oh, this is what I'm reading. and as I was translating it, I began to understand some, And this sucked me into the essence of eloquence. And there are so many commentaries.
Yeah.
And every quotation, you can get commentary. Now, if you compare that to the Great Exposition of Secret Mantra, there's nothing like it in terms of commentary. And so it makes it so much more difficult.
Why is that, do you think? Because of the nature of the topic, or?
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
And so in one way, it was easier to get obsessed with the essence of eloquence.
Because there's a never-ending rabbit hole of commentaries and...
Commentaries, and also it's so difficult that there's the rabbit hole of trying to figure out what the heck it's saying.
Yeah.
Because there are problems, if you are straightforward and admit.
Philosophical
problems.
Problematic.
And people take different positions on what's going on in order to make sense out of what Tsongkhapa is saying. And that's all very interesting.
Yeah.
So anyway.
I was interested in...
I got diverted.
No, it's fascinating because, and it was something I wanted to...
No, I mean diverted.
Oh, you got diverted from Ngakrim Chamo
yeah.
to
Yeah.
Lecture Ningpo. And then, so one of the things I was interested in is that your work is so broad. So there's the essence of eloquence, Tsongkhapa's position, but you were studying with Nyingma Lamas, you've written on Nyingma view, also Dopopa's Shentong, and so I was wondering, Dopopa's other emptiness, and I was wondering what led you to look at all those different angles on reality. And
let me pull this. It's not too bright. Yeah. Oh, good. This person who likes light. This actually is an effect of having looked at the sky so long.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're sensitive to light from those?
Yeah, it's made me photosensitive or something like that. This broadness is an effect of working with His Holiness.
Really?
He stretched me to the great exposition of Secret Mantra, right?
Yes, yep.
And so then whatever he's teaching, I have to learn.
Yes.
And so you get stretched here, you get stretched there, you get stretched here. You get used to being stretched.
Yeah. Because you're his translator?
Yeah.
And he's going to teach us
Yeah.
Jigme Lingpa or some Dzogchen text.
Yeah.
And you're like, I would better
Yeah.
read up on this stuff.
Yeah, and he's got a book coming out this spring.
Yes.
which, believe it or not, is already out in Chinese.
Oh, wow.
My husband
Yes.
translated it into Chinese, and it's out. They brought it out. This is Taiwan.
Yeah.
They brought it out in Taiwan
Uh-huh.
for his 80th birthday.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Wow.
And it's coming out by Snow Lion Shambhala
Yes.
in March.
Yeah.
And this is his teaching in London,
Yeah.
1984, I think. And I came upon the digitized version of his teaching me the same text in his office so that I would be able to translate it in London.
Your preparation, so to speak.
My preparation. And his teaching to me in his office was so inspiring
Yeah.
that I thought, oh, I could put this together
And combine it.
with what he taught in
Nice.
London and make a really fine book. I wanted to see if it would work together, and it did work.
Yeah.
So anyway, usually he wouldn't prepare me,
Yeah.
although he did realize if he was quoting something, he would need to prepare me.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a funny story. When he was going to Harvard to teach about the Four Noble Truths, he's landing in New York, and he calls me into his hotel room. And he lays out it must have been 5 minutes, he lays out what he's going to do. And he says, what do you think about that?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking,
I got some work to do.
no, he's like asking my advice on what he's going to do.
Oh, okay.
And I'm thinking, how could I have any advice on what he just said? And all I can say is, yeah, that looks good.
Sounds good.
Oh, should I overdo it? Oh, pay up.
Pay up on it. Pay up on it. Very nice. Oh, so then this broadness in your work is a reflection of being His Holiness's translator. What about the Dolpopa stuff? Is that your personal
Well, you see,
wanting to understand Tsongkhapa?
well, the thing about being sucked into working on the essence of eloquence is that he did not come to Shadze to teach it. He didn't come. He did not. But I was already sucked in.
Yeah.
And and John Powers,
Yeah.
who was one of my students, from the first day wanted to translate the sutra Unraveling the Thought.
Yes.
And week by week, we went through every syllable of that whole sutra.
Yeah.
So that broadened me into the sutra.
And that sutra's on Buddha nature and such, yeah?
Well, it's on the
Sutra.
three natures.
Yeah, three natures.
Yeah, and its own version of the Buddha nature,
Yeah.
surely.
Yeah.
And a huge panoply of aspects of the path.
Yes.
And it's so important to the seventh? Or the ninth chapter, I forget. That's so
what text?
important to the essence of eloquence.
Oh, okay.
So important.
Yeah.
And so that meant I had some familiarity with that. And then John had an interest he looked up some of the quotes from Wanchuk Wentek Yuanza, who wrote a huge commentary in Chinese. He's a Korean scholar who spent most of his life. Well, he once he got to China, he never went back to Korea. And then I went this sucked me into looking into his commentary, which was translated into Tibetan,
Yeah.
and looked into that more.
Yeah.
So you see one thing leading to another. And once you work in Lekshe Nyingbo,
Yeah.
once you work in the essence of eloquence, you have to take a look at Doboba's mountain doctrine.
Yes.
Because
Future, yeah.
that's Tsongkhapa's opposition.
Yes.
He's answering Doboba.
Yeah.
And once you look at it, you say, well, now, you got to do something with it.
The breadcrumbs keep following them, yeah.
And only 40% of that book
Yeah.
is Doboba's ideas. 60% of it is quotations
Yeah.
from India.
Yeah.
So I color-coded the whole book. That's how I know it's 40%.
Wow.
And I color-coded it and decided to translate only what Doboba said.
Yes.
And I said, I'll leave the quotations.
Yeah.
So I asked one of my students, Kevin Vos,
Yeah.
to hunt out, students are getting paid,
Yes.
hunt out all of the translations of these things that you can find. And at least we can put into the book the translations other people have done.
Yeah.
So I did all of Doboba, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
One thing leads to another, and you get all 40% done. And then you get other people's translations.
Put that in.
And then you look at one of them and you say, either, I can do better than this, and you do that one.
Yeah.
And then you look at the next one and you say, this is pretty good, but it's not my vocabulary.
Yeah.
So I'll do it myself.
Before you know it.
And then before you know it, you've done the 60%.
So I'm going to take this opportunity to ask you, can you give us a quick, because like people hear these words like other emptiness, and can you give us a quick dummy's guide? What's other emptiness?
A way to look at it is really in Geluk,
Yes.
in highest Yoga Tantra, in Guhya Samaja, the fundamental innate mind of clear light is manifested when all of the grosser levels of consciousness cease. So as His Holiness says, it is empty of all of those. Those must cease. And thus, one really has to say, and it's true, in Geluk, the fundamental innate mind of clear light is empty of all of the grosser levels of mind.
Yeah.
It is an other emptiness.
It's other in that it's other than the gross
It's
minds.
empty of
Of
all of the other levels of mind.
Yeah.
And so empty of the other,
Gross.
and those are gross levels of mind. And it is also self-empty, not in the sense that the fundamental innate mind of clear light is empty of itself, because if it was empty of itself, it wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be the fundamental innate mind of clear light. It is, what does then self mean? The word self is somewhat misleading.
Yeah.
But it's empty of its own inherent existence. So this is an other emptiness that is not contradictory with self-emptiness.
Yeah.
So it's a very clear exposition there within Geluk. So now, similarly, in Jonang, and Jonang existed prior to Sherab Gyaltsen, who is the chief philosopher, who became the chief philosopher. Ultimate reality is empty of all conventional things. It's empty of all conventional things. And so it is other empty in that sense.
Yes.
And it is not empty of itself.
Yeah.
Because if it were empty of itself, ultimate reality would not be ultimate reality. And that's sufficient
Sufficient for what?
for other emptiness. You don't need to posit some emptiness of inherent existence of
Of
itself.
the ultimate. Yeah.
Because they say if it were self-empty,
Yeah.
it would be empty of itself.
Yeah.
They just take self-emptiness to mean that.
Yeah.
Whereas a cup, it really seems to be in their system,
Yeah.
is empty of itself. It doesn't, it's just, it has no status
Yes.
when you come right down to it.
It's total delusion. Cup.
It seems to be that way.
Yeah.
Although I don't want to take that too far.
Yeah, 'cause-
I don't want to sound like a Gelugpa
Yeah.
who's somehow putting down Jonang, because I know Jonang well enough to really appreciate it
Yeah.
and to appreciate its strength
Yeah.
in the way that it talks about ultimate reality.
Yeah.
Because when you get to ultimate reality, as it's said in Nyingma, when you get to if you got to an area where the ground is made just out of gold,
Yes.
you're not going to find any dirt.
Yeah.
You're not going to find any dirt.
Yeah.
And so when you get to ultimate reality, as it's said in Gelug,
Yeah.
from a Buddha's own point of view, a Buddha just sees endless purity,
Yeah.
just sees gold,
Sees gold, right?
to use the metaphor.
Yes.
And so in Gelug, we have this statement, and I can switch to the we,
Yeah.
whatever system
Yeah.
one talks from.
Yeah, put the
you
hat
put
on.
on the hat. We say, well, a Buddha perceives, why does a Buddha perceive this junk? I
Yeah.
mean, no matter how pretty it is, even wonderfully pretty things,
Yeah.
it's junk really.
Yeah, it has to see through your mind.
Through you.
Through you.
And how's that?
That seems bizarre.
And
Because
you just say that.
yeah. Because that would mean that your mind is gold.
Yeah,
right?
you would
That's
think.
a bit of a problem.
And and you would just see.
Yeah.
But
so I want to
because-
they want to put a medium between the
And what does that
delusion
medium look like?
and the medium is some sort of gray area between. We have a third truth almost. you know?
Yeah, and yet there isn't.
There isn't. There's
Yeah.
no third truth. And so for I guess for Jonang, it doesn't make sense to talk about the ultimate truth of the cup. Then.
Well, now it's a strange thing in Jonang. There seems to be a replica of everything on within the ultimate.
Yeah.
Within the ultimate. And
So there is an ultimate cup? Like, is this
Yeah,
then, is this the
there
division
seems
of
to be-
Kunshin Yeshi, or what is it? Kunchi Yeshi. So, like, I'm thinking, like, the cup and the ultimate are not one thing, right?
yeah, they aren't.
This is
There's no
interesting.
way.
Yeah.
But there seems to be a realm, and actually it's even said that in that realm nothing is squishy.
Nothing is squishy.
Yeah, it's like everything is vajra.
Oh,
So I
okay.
asked one, studied with, is it just 2? 3 Jonang scholars. I asked one of them who had good sense of humor. I said, well, is the Buddha's complete enjoyment body just like a stone? Can't do anything? And he just laughed and laughed because he got the point.
Yes.
And it says that nothing's squishy. So since there seem to be these equivalents of everything, I wanted to say, well, what about snot? Because snot
The
has,
ultimate-
has to be squishy.
Yes, the ultimate snot. It has to be squishy.
But
So squishiness doesn't have a replica in the ultimate.
Well,
then,
you
hey?
wonder if it does. And you see, it gives you a different meaning of vajra.
Yeah.
That vajra, once something is made out of pristine wisdom, and it even is said to be hard, hard takes on a different meaning.
Yeah.
And so it really points you, once you get beyond the joke, to a different meaning of hard.
Yes.
And it's really beautiful in
Yeah.
there.
There's something deep
Yeah.
there, right?
Yeah, something very deep.
Yeah. So I want to be conscious of your time. I want to ask
Yeah.
you one more thing. So
Yes.
1991, you contract Lyme's disease
Oh, yeah.
and the brain infection, and you are paralyzed.
Yes.
Your experience of that, and you were talking about different levels of consciousness early, gross to
Yeah.
subtle, and I just maybe if you could say a little
Well, I
bit on
found I could retreat into repeating mantra. And I'd done a lot of mantra meditation at the monastery and without moving. And so I wasn't counting, because you see this involves moving.
Yes.
And I didn't use a rosary. I didn't move. And I learned to have very long breaths and repeating mantra mentally, and thus had a lot of facility with interior mantra. And I do advise that. I'm loath, is that the word? Hesitant to advise people, but I know from experience how helpful that is.
Yeah.
To be able to do things without your body.
Yeah.
And even when I got to the point where I could talk some, I would retreat and into this beautiful space and do mantra. And when I couldn't talk at all, it was beautiful, and I wouldn't struggle. I wouldn't struggle. That's the huge mistake people make. You know, that they want to communicate, or other people want you to communicate. That's the worst. A couple of doctors were wanting me to communicate at first. My God, what a torture. Just torturing. There's all sorts of very funny stories. And you can, I suppose that must have been very helpful to me. What brought me out and what probably saved me was that Ling Rinpoche had given me a mantra for when I got into difficulty.
And Ling Rinpoche is the Dalai Lama's senior tutor.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was leaving his, we had a longish audience, and he said if I had parche, interruption, difficulty, and it's it's a Manjushri mantra that I never really practiced, but only practiced enough so it was in my mind. And there was another Manjushri, typical Manjushri mantra for intelligence and speech, Omar Abatanadi, that I did a lot of, that Geshe Wangyal introduced all of us to. And that I was the one I retreated to doing in general. But when I was out and dying, that it was the one that Ling Rinpoche told me to do that surfaced.
That came back to you?
Yeah, at that time, it surfaced.
So it wasn't like an intention, it was just...
Yeah, it surfaced.
Wow.
And actually, I was floating.
You were floating?
Floating. It was in the process of death, which I'd been through. I almost died from charcoal fume inhalation. This happens to Tibetans because they burn charcoal in closed places, and people die.
Wow.
Fortunately, the charcoal was consumed, but I was dying in Dharamsala, and I realized I was dying, and went through certain of the phases, and I knew I was dying, and I thought, well.
So you were conscious of the dissolution process?
Oh yeah, and I thought, is there anything I can do about this? And I thought, well, I don't know if there's anything I could do. So I just went ahead, and then woke up in the morning to my amazement.
Wow.
Anyway, and there were other such experiences. So it was floating, so to speak, in golden light, and it was not as, I think, if I had not had more non-dualish experiences, I would have thought this is really super non-dual, but this actually had a little center to it.
Yeah.
It was totally gold light,
Yeah.
But there was a
There's
slight
a
center
so
to
it's
it.
not like totally not.
Yeah.
Okay.
And but out of this sky, gold sky, came Paul Jeffrey Hopkins.
A voice?
Yeah. And not calling me.
Yeah.
And I could hardly recognize Jeffrey as my real name.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, I'm in trouble. And because I could hardly recognize that as my name.
Why is that? Is the gross mental functions have
Yeah.
subsided?
Yeah.
So, like,
But actually, this one who was recognizing
yeah,
that I couldn't recognize,
yeah, the
hardly
one who's-
recognize.
Yes.
And then that's when the mantra came.
Okay.
Because you see, I'm in trouble.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Bache.
And actually, it came within the voice, my own voice,
Yeah.
of the
Oh, so it wasn't so
Yeah.
precise.
Yeah. But not the Omar
Oh,
Abazanate,
okay, it was
but
a
the other
different
one.
mantra, yeah.
Yeah. And that's what got me through that phase of it. And then the other aspect of it was throwing up, because that took the pressure out of my stomach.
Okay.
Actually, the nurse was trying. They had me in a private. They thought it was brain, well, which it was in a sense
Yeah.
at that point. And the nurse had actually held me down from. There were two nurses, and because I at one point, this you see was after that.
Yeah.
From throwing up. So at some point I came back to and realized I had my chance and threw up on her. Yeah. And actually she was not upset.
Yeah.
And she was apologetic.
Yeah.
Because she realized, oh, that's what he wanted
That's
to
what
do.
he needed to do.
And that took the pressure.
Out of that.
And that's what allowed me also to live, took that pressure off.
And this golden light, is it like, because normally you read, like in the text, you don't read about golden light. You read white, red, black. What do you take that to be?
This was preliminary.
Preliminary, okay.
Preliminary,
Yeah.
I think.
And is it true Trijang Rinpoche had read your palm?
Yeah.
And said that there was going to be an obstacle?
Yeah,
such as this?
and I don't know if he would have mentioned anything to Ling Rinpoche, if they buzzed around because they live quite distant from each other, or not.
Yeah.
And he had said that if I survived the problem, and actually he had the year right.
He had the year right.
Yeah, he had the year right. In
Ling
terms
Rinpoche,
of
or
my
Trijang?
Ling Trijang Rinpoche
Trijang,
had the year right.
Wow.
And I thought the world wasn't going to live that long, so I wasn't concerned because I had it figured out.
You had a better chance than the rest of the world.
Yeah, that the world was,
Adam
at
bomb.
the World War. And then he said there was another one later on, and then if I survived the problem later on, which I think now I have survived, I'll live a good long life.
Fantastic.
So if I have survived that one,
I'm
doing okay.
Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing with us. I know that you have the UMA Institute and you're doing a lot of work there. And so how can people connect with that and find out and benefit from all that work you're doing?
It's at umatibet.org.
We can put the website address up on the website.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated. There's an underline somewhere.
Okay, we'll put the link up so people can get to read about
there
all
are
these
12
texts.
translators.
Great. And anything else you want to share before we...
We're trying to get out Tibetan texts as they're taught in a Gelugpa monastic college.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So everyone go visit UMA Institute. There's so many questions more I wanted to ask you, but we'll leave it there, and maybe one day we can do it again.
It's been fun.
I'm glad
I
you
enjoyed it.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Professor.
Thank you.
Bye. Next on the Wisdom Podcast, we have Deborah Schoberlein David. Deborah is author of the book Living Mindfully, at Home, at Work, and in the World. And so on the next episode of the Wisdom Podcast, we'll talk about mindfulness in daily life. I hope you'll join us then.
I really loved the first podcast Wisdom that you did with His Holiness Karmapa. And in that, he mentioned that there's really a fourth category. And it made so much sense. In that fourth category, it's the secular category. And it's people who are interested in what can be called Dharma, but don't even need to know it's called Dharma. And they're interested because it makes sense and it's practical. If more people can hear and understand and internalize some of these teachings, then it will be better for the world and for us in it. So I'm in that fourth category in my public persona, and that's what I write for. And mindfulness makes sense in that category.